Hey, welcome to Illotalk, and this is another chapter of Heart of Eternity, the book that I am serializing as I write it, one chapter at a time. If you want to just jump right to the audio portion of this, I'll put a time code in the description of the video. But I had a couple of things to talk about beforehand. So these are some pages from my comic. And so I've released 5 pages of this. This is called Rage of Enlightenment. And we've got more pages coming. And it is a different Substack. And so if you haven't subscribed to Rage of Enlightenment, then go to the link that's showing on the screen right now. I will continue to mention it here on YouTube and on Illotalk Substack, but you're going to get the pages over there at the other thing. So let's jump into the next chapter. Millie's dog, Frank, was not intentionally destructive, but was nonetheless the cause of many broken things. Frank was a Saint Bernard with a ton of energy and no situational awareness. He was constantly sliming people's legs with his ever-present string of viscous drool hanging from his jowls, and his tail had a mind of its own. Millie's tail also had a mind of its own, but in a more literal way, because Millie's tail was a 6-foot-tall private investigator named Herb. Tonight was like most nights. The 4 of them were on a walk. Frank with his tail, because it was attached, and Millie with her tail, because he was being paid to follow her. Normally, the people Herb followed didn't realize he was following them. But it's hard to be inconspicuous when your jacket is on fire and you have a flaming red-hot glowing piece of rebar sticking out of your chest, especially at night. Herb wasn't actually impaled in a blaze at the moment, but he would be at some time in the future. Millie didn't know when Herb was going to die, but she knew what he'd look like when he did, and that is how she saw him, at the moment of death. That is how she saw everyone all the time. Most people do not see the moment of death more than once or twice in their lives. You may sit by an ailing grandparent as they pass or be unlucky enough to witness some horrific accident. But for most people, this was a rare and traumatizing event. People thought Millie was awkward or shy. She seemed to cringe when people made eye contact and had trouble focusing during conversations. But the armchair diagnoses of Millie's friends and coworkers were too mundane to be accurate. Millie wasn't an introvert or on the spectrum. Millie was death's seer. She always saw everyone how they would look at the moment of their death. This wasn't a big deal for those who would die in their sleep because they just looked older with their eyes closed. A couple of them had a smile on their face. It was everyone else that was hard to look at. Those purple-faced, bug-eyed people who would choke to death, those gaunt souls who would starve, the murdered, the maimed, the emaciated, the shot, the beaten, the burned. And so she saw Herb on fire with a red-hot stick of rebar embedded in his chest. He looked middle-aged and was stuck in an eternal agonized scream. She could also tell he was near because of the smell of burnt hair, clothing, and meat. Sometimes the smell was the worst part. Honestly, this seemed like the premise of a quirky sci-fi channel TV show in the 90s, but it wasn't quirky. It was horrendous, and it was ruining Millie's life. She struggled to hold a conversation, maintain relationships, and her attempts to warn people caused a lot of problems. There were some times when she'd warn someone about their impending demise, and they'd take her seriously. She could always tell if she was being taken seriously because she would see them change. Years ago, she was talking to a friend who looked very near his current age, bug-eyed and blue. She convinced him that, for his own good, he needed to slow down and chew each bite of food. He decided to take her advice. She watched him change. His eyes closed, his facial muscles relaxed, the veins and tendons of his neck stopped protruding, and his skin turned a normal color, then began to wrinkle into old age. He would die in his sleep decades later than he would have otherwise. The mob informant that had turned state's evidence also appreciated the warning, but the mob did not. "Excuse me, sir," Millie had said to the man. "Sir, I don't know how to say this, but I think you're going to be tortured or something?" "What? Who?" I don't know, sir. I'm sorry." "Keep your voice down." "Tortured?" "Yeah, or something. I'm sorry. I get premonitions?" "Okay, and I'm supposed to get tortured how?" "Well, I don't know exactly, but it seems like your legs and fingers are broken, and, spit it out, girlie," the man said urgently. Millie threw up and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand as she avoided looking at the man. "Sorry, it's so gross. Sometimes He grabbed both of her shoulders and leaned down to look her straight in the eyes. "Take a deep breath, doll. Tell me what else. It's important." She took a deep breath, cried as she looked up into his mangled face, and then blurted, "The side of your mouth is cut open, your eye is gone, and your ears are, I don't know, like mangled or dead, mostly pulled off or something." The man cursed under his breath. "When?" "I don't know. I never know. He was looking around frantically. He spoke into his chest. I'm blown. Do you hear me, pigs? I'll put you all in the ground before I let the tool man use his pliers on me. And then his appearance began to change as he said, Get me out of here. I'm going into protection. His legs straightened from the angles that they had been. His fingers bent back into place with multiple pops and snaps. His eye and ear grew back in, and he aged slightly. His clothing changed from brown leather jacket to a button-up flannel. He was wearing a trucker hat and holding a snow shovel. His face, now whole, was contorted in pain. As he turned towards the car that just showed up, Millie saw 2 small holes in the back of his flannel as dark red blossomed, staining his shirt. Mister, she called, don't shovel your driveway. What? He was getting into the car. Don't use a snow shovel. Okay, he said resolutely. He changed again, no hat this time, and slightly older. His hairline receded, and the blood from a bullet hole in his forehead began to run down his face as he shut the door and the car sped off. I bought him a couple of years, I guess. Millie mumbled to herself as she gingerly stepped around her puddle of vomit. On the other side of the street, a hulking man crammed into the driver's seat of a small sedan growled as he adjusted his gold chain. He snapped a couple photos of Millie and wrote down the address of the building she just walked into. Her flaming tail Herb was waiting outside her building the next morning. All right. So if you haven't read or listened to or watched and listened to these, then go to CoreyKerr.com/book. And that'll take you to all of the chapters of this. And if you'd like to see my comic, which is about insects going through the Industrial Revolution and whether or not progress is inevitable and the rebellion that can happen when you step on people's livelihoods, then go out, check out Rage of Enlightenment by going to CoreyKerr.com/rage. And otherwise, we will catch you guys later. Go make stuff.